Okay, Danny looks, I don't know what's going on, but Danny looks like he's with some people that are stuck in the lobby. So I don't know. But Danny is, I will introduce Danny. Danny is one of probably the newest plan reviewers at the city. We're thrilled to work with him. He's a great addition to their team. So he's on the call. Dana Box, are you on this call? I do think I saw Dana as well somewhere in the sign in. So she's also a plan reviewer. Ashley Cheney. Sorry, she looks like another person stuck in the lobby. Kristen Mon.
Hello, I am Kristen Mon. I'm the housing coordinator for the city of Tulsa, and I am focused on the development and preservation of affordable housing.
Bruce Bosley, are you on the call? Okay, what about Elliot Nelson?
Hi, this is Casey Stowe. Elliot is also stuck in the waiting room for some reason. So he and I do development work together, focusing primarily on downtown Tulsa.
Okay, thank you. I scheduled the meeting and I should be able to let people in, but somehow it's not letting me. So I don't know what the solution is here. If those of you on our team over here can look at that and see if we can figure it out. So Stephen Watts, are you on the call? Josh Miller?
Yep, Josh Miller with George Kaiser Family Foundation, work a lot on mixed income housing.
Josh Kunkel, I think I saw you. Okay. Okay, Weldon just sent me a text and said that he says he's in the lobby and waiting for someone to let him in, and it is not letting me let people in at this point, so I don't know.
Susan, did you set up the original meeting?
I did.
Because I think if we can access the meeting options, I think we can turn off the lobby part and potentially just automatically bypass people.
Yeah, I actually set up the meeting, Nathan, and I just did that. So I updated the settings to where it should let people bypass the lobby.
Oh, okay. Good. Okay.
I don't know if they have to leave and try to come back.
Okay. Well, can they hear us or not?
Probably not. See if that works.
Oh, so you set up the meeting, so maybe you can let them in. Okay. I don't know why Lou Reynolds is back in the lobby.
Well, Susan, the reason I'm in, I dialed in because we couldn't get in, and we're trying to get in online so we can see everything too.
I'm so sorry. We'll get through it in a minute, hopefully.
That's okay.
So, Weldon, did you get in? Okay. Stuart Vanderwilly?
Sorry, Susan. This is Weldon. Yes, I'm in.
Oh, thank you. Great. Awesome. Stuart Vanderwilly, are you here? Molly Jones?
Yeah, this is Molly. I'm here. I'm the president of Jones Design Studio, and we are interested in doing a lot more residential development. We've got, we're the architects on Heartwood Commons, the first co-housing project here in Tulsa, and looking to do a lot more of similar housing projects within the city. So.
Great. Arturo Saldivar? Stuart McDaniel, I know I saw you sign in.
Stuart McDaniel, doing with Rubik's 2 Communities, doing work in the Crutchfield neighborhood.
Philip Conley. Blake Boswell. Okay, so I don't know if that was Blake Boswell because it sounded like, I don't know. We just couldn't make out that. We heard some speaking, but I don't think any of us could make out the words. The connection's not good or something. So I don't know what's up with that, but if you can hear us, then maybe you can just communicate. If you need to communicate with us, you could do it in chat. Tim Beckman.
Hi, this is Tim Beckman, and I'm president of CJC Architects, an architecture firm here in Tulsa.
So I'm going to go back to Weldon Bowman just because I didn't ask him to introduce himself. And Weldon, if you can give your name, your organization, and what kind of development operations you guys do.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I kind of jumped in and just said I was here, and then I saw his introduction. Yeah, this is Weldon Bowman, owner of W Design. We do a lot of single-family, residential, multifamily, commercial development here in Tulsa. A lot of infill type stuff. So, architecture firm and interior design firm.
Okay. And I want to ask if there's anybody else. Let's see. Sophia, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Sophia Noche, do have background in residential construction, building, whatever, and focusing both in Kendall Whittier and on the north side.
Okay, I'm looking at the name Jessica. I don't think you've introduced yourself.
Hey, Jessica Shelton, Tulsa Habitat for Humanity. We do mostly single-family infill in and around the downtown area. We're starting to get into attached single-family and rental.
Okay, if you could just chime in if you are not on this list, or if you didn't introduce yourself, if you could just chime in and introduce yourself. I don't know who else might be on here.
Hello, I'm Aaron Meek. I don't know if I can't get in, but I thought I'd just announce myself. Group M Investment.
This is Becky Gligo. I'm the Housing Policy Director for the City of Tulsa.
So Aaron, can you see this? We can hear you, so you look like you're in. Can you see the PowerPoint?
I cannot. All I've got's introductions up right now.
That's the PowerPoint.
Okay, that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else?
Susan,
I'm Angela.
Susan.
Can you hear me?
Susan,
Listen, I think that's. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, Luke. I knew you were. Oh no.
Natalie Cornett's here with me. It's Lou Reynolds.
Good, thank you. I know. I talked to you, but I know you were here. I didn't call on you. Sorry. Anybody else?
Josh Kunkel, Method Group.
Okay, good deal.
Turn off some.
Okay, and we are, I'll just say, we are having a little feedback and some weird sound issues. So if you're not talking, and I'll turn this over to John to get started now. So if you're not talking, if you could mute yourself so that the sound quality is better. Anyway, thanks again for being here. And we definitely want you guys to respond and you know, to get your conversation in this. So if you have questions, let us know. You can also send things in chat. So I'll turn it over to John.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and apologize for the technical issues that we're having. Like Susan said, my name's John Tankard. I'm a senior comprehensive planner with the Tulsa Planning Office, and I'm going to go over some data and some survey results related to infill development in Tulsa. So this first slide, the parcel data set we use from the county assessor has a year built field that indicates what year a structure on a given parcel was constructed. And this animation illustrates existing structures in the Tulsa region by the year that they were built. As you can see, throughout the 20th century, there was vast growth from downtown out to the city limits of Tulsa. The city annexed large areas of land that then developed quickly as the suburban communities around us began to develop fast as well. Next slide. So Tulsa's growth really peaked in the 1950s and 1960s, with 1959 having the highest 10-year total at over 30,000 properties. So since then, we've seen a pretty steep decline in the number of new properties. However, the character of what development we do have has been changing over time. These next few slides are going to kind of show the shift from greenfield development to infill development in the city limits of Tulsa. And we defined infill as when a property is built in an area where the average age of surrounding properties is 20 years older or more, and define greenfield as the development in areas where the average age of surrounding properties is less than 20 years. So with that definition, for the 1980s, we have over 14,000 properties that were built. And of those, 12.6% fit our definition of infill development, or about 1 in 8 properties. In the 1990s, that total number drops to around 8,000 properties, but the proportion of those that meet our definition of infill increases to nearly 1 in 5. By the 2000s, we see a continued decline in total new properties. However, the proportion we identify as infill development more than doubles to over 40%. And by the 2010s, which our data set doesn't include all of the projects completed in 2019, but we do see a continued decline in total new properties, and the proportion has shifted to basically 1 in every 2 projects we see being infill development. So with this trend in mind, the Tulsa Planning Office worked with the City of Tulsa Housing Policy Director and the Communications Office to put out a public survey to gauge sentiments about new housing in existing neighborhoods. The results of that survey show a lot of interest in the potential benefits of infill development, with all of the responses having greater than 50% either very interested or somewhat interested. In particular, 90% of our respondents were interested in replacement or rehabilitation of older, poorly maintained homes, and a similar proportion were interested in more efficient use of existing city infrastructure and services, farmland and green space outside of the city being preserved, as well as new opportunities for home ownership. These results tell us that there is strong favor for revitalization efforts, as well as fiscal responsibility from the city. And it makes sense from the city's perspective to put a high value on infill development because of the existing investment in infrastructure like streets and utilities, as well as public services like transit, police, and fire. The areas that infill development occurs in are already served, and adding new residents makes more efficient use of those resources and results in stronger fiscal stewardship of taxpayer dollars. So while we had those potential benefits of infill development, there were also potential concerns respondents identified, which can help us to understand what guidance is needed for infill projects. The number one concern identified was a loss of neighborhood trees, while new housing being too close to existing housing and the displacement of current households were also significant concerns. So these graphics show citywide results, but these results vary from neighborhood to neighborhood. And now that our survey is closed, we'll be digging into that data more deeply to better understand what interests and concerns are distinct to different areas of the city. But at the citywide scale, when asked about what different missing middle housing types should be more readily allowed in neighborhoods, backyard cottages or accessory dwelling units, ADUs, townhomes, duplexes, and even courtyard or garden apartments all return results with around 2/3 of respondents viewing them favorably. Only walk-up or mixed-use apartments, as well as triplexes and quadplexes, had less than 50% approval, and only that by a small margin. So these survey results and the data analysis I showed first indicate to us that we need to identify a path forward to better facilitate this type of development in ways that are sensitive to existing neighborhoods. But overall, the appetite may well be there for a broader spectrum of housing types in Tulsa. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Travis Hulse now.
Thanks, John. So we just want to have a quick kind of interactive poll. We're going to throw in the chat, I think is where it'll show up. And it's going to be 3 different questions. If you could just go ahead and submit your response to those, you can kind of see the questions here on the screen. The polls themselves, which you should see now. The first one being, what is your current experience with infill? We'd like to get a sense from you of how much you're actually doing your work in infill development proportionally. So there's some options in a drop down that you can select, and just kind of quick gut reaction. Is it the majority of your work, some of your work, none of your work, but you have experience, or just none of your work and you don't have experience, is the first question. And you can also all kind of follow along and see the results real time here to these questions as you answer them. So we'll give you a few minutes to fill these out while Amy gets these put into the chat. The second one that we've thrown up there is more kind of speaking to the trend. So I think John has kind of established that there appears to be a trend over time in the city of Tulsa, really working back into infill development. Do you foresee that trend continuing over the next, we kind of said 10 years, but I think just generally, yes, no, do you think that that is a trend that will continue? And then we'll have kind of one more question there. Okay, Sophia. So it looks like for some they can't, don't show on the screen. So yes, I'll continue to read them out. And then the third one, looks like we may be having some trouble responding. Hang tight, Casey, and see if by chance you can get it to work here in a second. See if there's a bit of a delay. Maybe not. And don't have the third one up there quite yet. Okay, there we go. So the third question, personal desire for developing residential infill projects. So how would you rate your personal desire? And I, suspect this is kind of you on behalf of the organization that you represent. Very interested, slightly interested, slightly uninterested, or very uninterested. I'm not sure if we can see if there's a way to make those polls open up. Looks like a few folks aren't able to. They're having a error in their app. I don't know if you're trying to communicate on your phone, you may try to use your desktop, or if that's not the issue, then it just may be a limitation of Teams. And I think, generally we just kind of wanted to get a sense. We'll talk through these just momentarily, and if you haven't had a chance to respond and you just want to kind of tell us verbally, it would be nice to hear from you that way as well. So I'll kind of start working through this. Looks like the first question, experience with infill, large majority. Of course, so far we've not had everybody able to participate out of the 30 or so in this meeting. But the folks that have participated say that really a fair amount of the development work is infill. So that seems to suggest that the work that we're seeing through our data is work that you're all doing. Likewise, continue to see that trend moving forward. Personal desire, very interested. So, I mean, I don't think that there's anything too unique or different, but let's go to the next slide and maybe even just have a conversation for those of you who are unable to participate in that. Especially if you'd say, no, I don't do infill. I don't really have an interest in it. We'd love to hear your perspective as well. So you can either throw that in the chat box, or you can click the little hand icon at the top and raise your hand, or interrupt me. That won't bother me either. But here's just some kind of general questions to throw out there. You know, from a financially feasible perspective, do you think that infill is an attractive investment? What challenges or issues do you see with that, or have you seen with that? We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second with the housing study, but just more broadly, is there anything that you'd kind of say has been a challenge on the finance side of things? Same thing as just a perception of market demand for residential infill in Tulsa. Looks like a lot of you are very active in that space and think that that's something that will continue to move forward. So that says to me that your perception is that that will continue to be an important topic and something that we really need to be considering in our work. And then we just kind of reiterated one of the survey questions, the benefits or opportunities for residential infill in Tulsa. So John kind of went over this briefly. I don't know that I need to spend a whole lot of time here, but maybe I'll just pause momentarily and ask folks to speak up if there's anything you'd like to say, again, either in agreement or contrary to some of these initial findings that we've received through the survey, just in general about infill in Tulsa. Okay, well, not hearing anything, that's okay. I mean, it seems pretty true to us. And, it's important to us is, we do these surveys. I think there was a question that went out a little bit earlier. Sophia, you asked about, who responded to these surveys, how many people. I can't remember. John, what was the approximate number of total participants?
I think we had over 1,600 responses.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, we had a lot of people participate. I think that, what we've seen in our surveys wasn't a perfect cross section of people as far as representative as Tulsa as a whole. We're trying to work through that a little bit still, and we still have a few more surveys that we need to input in there. But I think I saw Emily say we could even share some of those details afterwards with this group as well. Angela, is there anything specifically you want to say about affordable rental units, or just kind of that comment?
That's my space, and the lack thereof is something that I work with on a daily basis. And so rehabbing the existing poorly maintained homes so that there are more options available for our community is what's most important to me and what I'm listening to with this conversation, hoping to find out.
Great. Any specific kind of questions that you're looking for that we can be mindful of and kind of responding from our perspective?
Not at this time. I had a wonderful conversation with Kristen last week, and we'll have a few more in the next couple of weeks to figure everything out before I just throw out questions.
Okay. All right. Good enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
As far as how many people responded, Stu, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I think we can pull some of that together, and I'm not sure if John or Emily might be able to look into that a little bit just while we continue on here. But Brad, your point, we will hit that pretty hard here momentarily. So be interested to hear your take on zoning specifically. Amy, I think we can move on. So many of you are probably aware of and participated in some way in the recently completed downtown and surrounding neighborhoods study and strategy. It's a mouthful, but it was a great process we went through, led by a consultant, Development Strategies out of St. Louis. Myself and Becky Gligo, the housing policy director, really led that effort. And it focused on these core areas. I'm not going to talk too much about it because there's a full report that you can read online, and probably many of you have already heard this. But one of the important things is part of that study and strategy on the next slide that we've identified from the consultant really helps us to understand from a demand perspective, how many units, and this is projected into the next 10 years, we see in these various sections of affordability, workforce, moderate, upscale, luxury. The answer is everything. And I think it does focus in on some greater needs within the affordable and workforce areas. But this chart really kind of breaks down that demand overall, both within the downtown, specifically within the IDL, as well as kind of the other parts of that study area. So if you haven't had a chance to read through that, Daniel Jeffries, if you're here, if you wouldn't mind dropping a link in the chat box to that report so people can just have that easy access. Look at that study, look at kind of all of the findings that are there that support these demand numbers and kind of the process the consultants went through. I'm not going to spend too much time there just because we have a few other things we really want to focus on here. Next slide. So as a part of that conversation in the study, really looked at not only is there a preference or an interest in missing middle housing, missing middle, as we've kind of defined it and as we talk about in the study, is really, anything beyond a detached home and below or beneath or in between a large scale multifamily apartment complex. So we're talking duplexes, townhomes, condos, multi-unit homes of various sizes, cottage house developments, all of those types of things. So this specifically is just an example of a feasibility test that was run by the consultants for a 9-unit, and they identified what they looked at for what the gap may be if there was one, and they identified that there in fact was. And this just kind of helps us as we move forward and kind of crafting our policies around the revolving loan funds, around the downtown TIF, and any of the other kind of actions and programs that we have underway at this city. And Becky and Kristen could probably be best to talk more about that if there were specific questions, but this kind of is a part of our understanding and important in our missing middle conversations. Next slide. So what we want to focus a little bit though with this group on, and what was brought up in the chat, is really one of the key barriers to missing middle housing outside of the financial aspect of it, is any regulations that exist within the zoning code. So the study concluded that that was something that we needed to examine as a city and the Tulsa Planning Office, since that's kind of our world, to determine if there was any issues there and what was preventing these different housing typologies from being built within the core of the city and even citywide, truthfully, as we could really look at some of those issues as well. Next slide. And I think that as you'll find, in addition to the zoning piece, just again to reiterate, we noticed that yes, there's kind of a market gap there. Based on our surveys and outreach, there's an interest there. There's a lot of conversations that we've had. And so I think, again, not to reiterate too much, but just that it's a complex issue that we're dealt with and something that we're going to start to kind of look at piece by piece. So next slide. One of the first things that we're going to focus on is the zoning aspect of it. And we've started to look at the zoning code kind of in the details, into the weeds. Some of you might be able to appreciate just getting into that. Looking at, okay, what does the zoning say about neighborhoods within the housing study, specifically that area, but also citywide? So when we've started looking at the zoning code, we kind of ask ourselves, okay, what are we trying to build to? What is our, what are the parameters that we have within the neighborhoods of Tulsa? So there's a couple of examples that we put together to kind of visually describe the current status of neighborhoods in the Tulsa area, downtown specifically, This first one is the Heights neighborhood. And this is a snapshot of an existing lot with duplexes on, well, actually what would be a 4-square duplex located on a lot that, is 50 foot wide, 130 to 140 feet deep. That's kind of the typical lot size that we're seeing. So Amy, you can just kind of click through these. This is just kind of a nice visual to see, what does that look like from a scale perspective? How well does it fit in? Those are questions that we need to answer for the neighborhood and the people that live there. You can just keep clicking through these, Amy. There's about 6, I think. And that's all important because the zoning code is going to, make sure that we can not only site a building on a lot that's only 50 feet wide, but we also want to make sure that we can address any concerns about the scale and the bringing in new housing into these existing neighborhoods. So this is the last example in a Pearl that is a single story, Craftsman duplex. What would that look like? Fit in between a couple of homes. Again, this is a real life example in Pearl. So this gives you kind of a sense of what we're after. So as we looked at the zoning code, this is what we're trying to address. This is at least an example of that. And I think we haven't even begun to have conversations with the neighborhoods and the people that live there. So it's important for us to have those conversations. But we kind of wanted to start with you all and share with you a couple of our proposed changes that we feel like will address a lot of these issues to open up the opportunity in some of our neighborhoods to bring in the missing middle housing that the study has identified, but even citywide that has been identified through small area plans, whether that's Crutchfield, whether that's Pearl, Crosby Heights, Greenwood Unity Heritage, you name it. I think all of those small area plans identify an interest from the people who live there to have this type of affordability and housing diversity within their neighborhoods. And so we think that there's opportunities not only within the study area, but also citywide. So I'm going to turn the time over to Nathan, who's going to talk a little bit about those specifics that we're looking at to propose and to help change. And I'll try to kind of keep an eye on some of the chats as I think there's some good conversation there as well. But take it away, Nathan.
Great. All right. Thanks, Travis. Well, the first thing I'll mention is that as we started to look into this, we obviously had a lot more background for our study area, which led us to think we might take a more aggressive approach in certain geographies, but it gave us a real good opportunity to still audit our citywide regulations to understand if there were some initial changes we could make to eventually start to even transition in those areas to some more types of housing. A few of the barriers that we have already honed in and started to really consider alternatives to are obviously the uses and where they're allowed. Lot area and lot widths have become extremely important due to some of the older plats and older lots that have been established in those neighborhoods. And then finally, nonconformities due to the same reason. So in each of these, I'm going to talk about what we've done on a citywide versus an overlay. And for those of you who aren't aware, we have an overlay tool in our zoning code that allows us to essentially assign zoning flexibilities to a specific geography, whether it's adding restrictions or loosening existing restrictions. We can do that without altering the underlying zoning in those areas. And so I think our initial strategy is going to be an overlay for our study area that tries some additional concepts, but then still making some additional adjustments citywide as well. When it comes to uses, our zoning code allows uses in two ways. It says they're either a by right use or they're by a special exception. For the citywide changes, we're not proposing any changes to this at this current time because we are just wanting to be able to make sure we understand completely what the implications are before we make those changes. But in the overlay, we have opened up the opportunities for the set of uses that you see here. And our code basically classifies residential uses under the building type to which they are assigned. And those of you that are familiar, you might know currently in RS3 and RS4 by right, you are restricted wholly to doing single family detached homes. You can do a duplex by a special exception. There's additional restrictions even when you get to that point that we're going to talk about more on some later slides. But really, that's all you're given in RS3 and RS4, and those are probably the most prominent zoning districts. Then, as far as those other uses go, you're pretty limited only to multifamily districts and areas where those would be allowed by right without a lot of exceptions. And so this is going to really open opportunities up on some of the neighborhoods that are zoned at RS3, RS4, but we would like to see some of the missing middle implementation occur. Next slide. So for lot area and lot width, right now on a citywide basis, if you are in RS3 or RS4, you're given the opportunity to get an exception for a duplex, but then you're immediately hit with a 9,000 square foot lot area requirement with a 75-foot lot width requirement and a 25-foot setback from other residential properties, which essentially rules out your opportunity on most of the lots that we have in town that are zoned for RS3. So what we've decided to do is take those duplex lot restrictions and align them with single family detached homes. So on a citywide basis, if you were able to at least obtain an exception to install a duplex, you would be able to put one on the same size lot. You would be able to put a detached house. And I think the reasoning for that is that we've really understood you can fit 2 units on a lot in the same footprint and envelope as you could do a single family unit with that additional unit added without a big implication to the neighborhood. So this is the final look at what that change would be to those lot and area building regulations on duplexes. So you could see before that 9,000 square foot played over to RS3 and RS4, and then you still had to have 6,900 square feet all the way through all of the RM districts, even though you could build single family homes and other things on lots much smaller. So what we've done is basically fit duplexes in on the minimum lot sizes within each of those districts so that when you are allowed to build one, you don't have to be up against lot and area building regulations as well. For the overlay, we went a step further with this by making sure that we went through and adjusted those lot and building regulations for all of those uses that we were opening up. First of all, we had to establish a set of lot and building regs for those uses because in a lot of those districts before, there was no previous restrictions just due to the fact they weren't permitted. So we established a new set of standards that were applied in that overlay only area to basically accommodate each of those missing middle housing types in the areas that we knew there was demand for those, and tried to make them fit within those lots that were in the neighborhoods already and that were established by plats long ago. And then, of course, we also still removed those additional setback requirements and restrictions that were becoming very prohibitive on those lots. Nonconformities came up as a discussion point because there are a lot of lots in town that don't meet the zoning regulations of the district that they are zoned, and most of them were platted long before we established the zoning regulations of today. If you read the nonconforming provisions currently in our code, you're limited only to building a detached single family home on a nonconforming lot. So what we wanted to do within this overlay was open up, again, more uses, including duplex and multi-unit houses that could still be constructed on those legal nonconforming lots and utilize the provisions of nonconformities that are found in the zoning code. So this provides a lot more opportunity, even when they drop below those standards we've established, for people to still insert additional density and uses on those lots. This chart would show you what the final proposal for those lot and building regulations would be within the overlay. So I realize this is a lot of numbers and a lot of strike throughs and lines, but in essence, what we did was try to establish for each of those districts the right for folks to build any of these types of building types and actually accommodate the number of units required to obtain that housing type. So for a multi-unit house, you have to have a minimum of 4 units. So we needed to make sure that a lot area per unit restriction would at least align with that minimum lot area required in the district, which we've done both for apartments, multi-unit houses, and so on. Cottage houses developments require a minimum amount of units already. And so they require a larger lot area to accommodate some of their rear entries and the courtyard space mandated by the zoning code. And then finally, we did the lot widths again, to try and align closer with your average lot in those areas of the study area, which generally are about 50 feet wide. So this final map that John put together and really helps us illustrate where the new opportunities would be, basically takes an analysis of those changes we're making to the lot area requirements and the lot width requirements, and shows you how many, or at least an illustration of where the opportunity is going to present itself for those new building types on the lots within those areas. So the orange is showing you where the changes to duplexes citywide would apply and would now allow a duplex where previously would have been restricted. And then if you take it closer into the overlay boundary, it's showing you those additional zoning districts and where those other uses also would be opened up and where the opportunity would be to insert those. And today you would be required essentially to rezone or seek drastic relief from the Board of Adjustment before you could get there. These are a couple of topics that we're going to continue to discuss. Like Travis said, you guys are really the first folks we've looked at this with and have shown you kind of the strategies that we're approaching. We know that there's still other barriers that we have to consider and that we're going to talk about as we continue to develop this overlay and these provisions that we're talking about. Parking being a big one, especially with apartments. Even if it's small scale apartments, you end up really running out of space when trying to accommodate all the parking needs. So I think what we will likely do in the overlay will be some proposal to minimize those parking restrictions on some of those uses. And then also setbacks beyond even just the additional setbacks we talked about adjusting earlier, to see if some of those multifamily or single family setbacks could be reduced to help create larger footprints or at least areas for developable opportunities. The final piece, and this is kind of where we throw it back to you guys again, is we want to understand what your barriers are when you're interacting with neighborhoods. Obviously, there's often a really aggressive response from neighbors when multifamily or density being added to a neighborhood is proposed. And so we want to understand better what those concerns are that you guys have heard, and also what your process is. So if it's something that you are going to try and develop in a neighborhood, are you approaching those neighbors ahead of time? Are you waiting until you have to be forced into a public hearing to talk with those neighbors? And kind of what kind of feedback you're receiving from them would be helpful for us. And then finally, we're just wondering what neighborhoods or areas you found to be engaged and to either respond negatively or positively to ideas that you're proposing. And I think that's the last slide that I have for this. And so Travis, I don't know if the intent was to go back to discussion at this point and talk through some of that, but.
We've had some good discussion kind of going on in the chat box. And I don't know if anybody wants to kind of bring that conversation into this larger group, trying to kind of respond to those as they come in. But yeah, I think just generally, any input or thoughts or feedback at this point, Nathan mentioned, and this is, you are the first group that we've really put these numbers in front of outside of our office. So we want to hear from you, since you are the ones that build homes or are participating in that in some way. We do not. So we're not the experts as far as that goes. Are we missing something? Have we not thought about, in any kind of hypothetical scenario or situation that you're thinking about? Really, I think open-ended invitation to talk about any and all of it.
It looks like John did just go ahead and plug the map into the chat as well for those that were asking for it. And then I think the only one that Travis, you didn't respond to was Dwayne noted in here that Osage was missing, and that's purely just parcel data issue. We don't have the parcel detail for Osage that we do for Tulsa County. I see Casey has his hand up.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a quick question. In the examples that you show, those little kind of renderings where you showed where a two-story duplex was, nestled very appropriately in a row of two-story homes, and a single-story duplex the same in a row of single-story homes. Is there some type of, forgive me if I've missed it, But is there some type of form-based guideline that would prevent somebody in this example you're showing right now, where everything's one story, to come in and build a 2-story or something that was inappropriate or outsized for the rest of the legacy housing stock on a particular block face?
Unfortunately, there's not at this point in time. In fact, most of our neighborhoods have a standard 35-foot maximum height allowance, which you guys may see illustrated very plainly if you drive through some of the neighborhoods that have seen residential infill occurring. A lot of the homes are much taller than the ones neighboring them. But it is a consideration that could be taken into, especially an overlay discussion, in looking at some sort of contextual height restrictions and how that might look at a neighborhood level.
Yeah, so in theory, not as, I guess, with the neighborhood character overlay, Nathan, I didn't hear if you mentioned that specifically, but a separate tool to address that more form-based context is something that could apply, but would be separate of this overlay, which is really addressing the kind of lot area and use issues.
Yeah, and I realize that your goal here is to actually reduce restrictions instead of imposing more.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I'm just trying to think through some potential unintended consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good feedback.
Yeah.
It's one of those things we struggle with, I think, already, just because of the nature of that standard height allowance within those neighborhoods. So without touching that particular restriction, we're still leaving it open to what it could be built to today, which in some instances could be, a negative impact.
This is Ross Heyman from Capitol Homes. I just want to say thank you to the whole city and the planning office for all your effort on it. I'm not quite able to follow every detail of what changed, but I'm excited to study it. And it seems like it's kind of going to open up a significant amount of this missing middle stuff that I think a lot of people have been after for a long time to drive more affordable housing. Travis, you had mentioned the timeline. I think Sophia had asked about that. Can you talk about that a little bit more? What is the initiation process? What does that mean with the city council?
Yeah, and can I deflect that to Susan? Because she's more articulate about that process. She's the pro.
Yeah. So initiation is just the formal sort of endorsement of us moving forward with that work. Someone has to, zoning code amendments, someone has to initiate them. And planning commission, city council, I can for some, but I typically limit those to more cleanup type of things rather than policy shifts. So that's really it just so that we have that endorsement to get started, and the details will follow, and that'll be a different discussion when that comes back to the planning commission and city council.
Gotcha. And so that initiation process is kind of the city council voting to formally commence. It's almost the very beginning of this road. But if there were some builders in town that said, we're excited about this, when could we build something? If we had to just ballpark, is it 6 months or a year and a half? Is there any way to try to project about when this might kind of come to fruition in practical terms for a home builder or a developer?
Well, we have some conversations we need to have with neighbors and groups, and so I don't know. We've done a lot of work in our office, at least kind of the first stab at it. So your input, other people's input, 6 months probably is best case scenario.
Gotcha. Thanks for sharing.
Travis, just to kind of respond to a few of the questions here. I know, Stuart, you posed a question about the 25-foot platted lots. Is there a desire to build, like, how many units would you consider feasible on those 25-foot lots?
I mean, if you've seen the city of Chicago, people can do a 3 flat on a 25. really a single family duplex where it's a 2-flat or a 3-flat. Just the neighborhood we are working in has a lot of shotgun housing platting that's now being used as doubles, but with the demolition of homes, it's left us back with the original 25s, which is how we intend to use them. And my solution up to this point, with Dwayne's extraordinary help, was really to plat it as CH with a optional, with a, Dwayne, what was it called? A development plan, optional development plan, or where we layered in requirements that reduced the abilities of CH. That was the only way to do it.
So the reason I was kind of wanting to pry more on that specifically was those 25-foot platted lots in the overlay area would be considered legal nonconforming if we made the change that we're proposing. And with the change to the nonconforming restrictions, we did allow multi-unit houses, which would be 4 units, as well as the duplex consideration, and then single family would still be allowed, obviously. But that at least is something that wouldn't be available today on those 25-foot lots. So you're given a 4-unit allowance instead of at least just limiting you to 1.
Mm-hmm. Is the overlay the same overlay that would be applied to different areas, or can each area have its own set of?
So the study area that we've shown would be the geography we're proposing to be all under the same set of rules that we're proposing. But overlays can be, pursued by individual neighborhoods to seek additional changes to those areas, as well as this overlay that we're proposing could be duplicated later. And this kind of speaks to Josh Kunkel's question in the chat. This could be essentially a pilot that later could be duplicated in another neighborhood if it works, and that it's something that another neighborhood had a desire for.
Okay.
Oh, I see Jessica's hand just went up.
Hey, Jessica Shelton here. We look forward to this. I think this will be a good thing. We really don't run into the running out of lot area or width of lot as much as we run into the setback issues, but I'm glad to hear that's on your radar as well. Some of the stuff that was introduced in 2016, even before these changes that you're proposing here, we haven't been able to fully take advantage of yet. And that's because of how things are being translated over at the permitting center. And so something's being lost in translation from the planning office over to the permitting center. And I think it's a simple lunch and learn, session that could clear some of this stuff up. Some of the feedback that we were getting from plan reviewers is not understanding some of the terminology for the different building types that are referenced in the zoning code. They were taking that to mean that's how you look it up in the IRC. And that's prevented us from moving forward on a couple of projects because it would create some additional requirements that don't come with single family. So I don't know if you have any plans for how some of this stuff can be introduced over to the permitting center.
I think we'll definitely have more extensive conversations with our plan reviewers. Anytime we go through amendments to the zoning ordinance, which they're tasked with enforcing daily, we'll generally try to have lead in with them to discuss the changes that we're making and make sure, obviously, that they don't see any major red flags with what we're proposing and what they do every day. So yeah, to answer your question, I think we'll definitely be trying to make sure everyone is on the same page before any of this goes into effect. But it sounds like we may need to go ahead and start talking anyway about what's already adopted.
And what's helpful are these diagrams. Sometimes we talk around in circles with plan reviewers, and a diagram can help clear things up from the zoning code side.
That's good feedback. Thanks.
Nathan, do you see the question about lot splits from Brad in the chat?
Brad, are you saying that the plats themselves restrict lot splits, or that they've already just been platted the lots are too small to split?
No, we own like a corner lot outright, and the original plat, which is like 1954, it says, oh, I can't think of the wording, but it basically says no structure shall be built with on the structure. I can't think. It says basically you can build a structure, you can't change the footprint. Like it's like an 8,000 square foot lot, give or take. And I think it words it. I can actually attach it, but it's basically saying you can't lot split without. As far as I know, I talked to Lou Reynolds once about this. About it's basically you have to replat it or do a subplat. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's what you're. It sounds like it's more of a private deed restriction that's baked into that subdivision plat, which from the city side wouldn't be enforced or be amendable. It's more of an agreement between property owners within that platted area, and that does create some issues for sure. And this would not alter any of those private deed restrictions, I guess. In response, it would, those would still be applicable if someone were to enforce them from that subdivision area.
So would something like that still require just a subplat or some sort of legal work to make sure you could basically have to protect yourself, essentially, would be the way to think about it.
Right. Yeah. If it is indeed just a deed restriction, the city wouldn't necessarily be a party to it. So that would, anything we change in the zoning code would not overrule that underlying agreement that was in that deed. I know a lot of those, go unenforced if there's not, like a HOA or some sort of association that's actually enforcing those covenants, but there is a need probably to go in and amend or to vacate those underlying restrictions before you be totally clean on it.
Okay.
Any other questions from the group? Looks like got a couple of things here in the chat. Before I get to those, so our goal here in presenting you with what we've kind of considered as it relates to the findings of the housing study and some of the other policies within our adopted documents is, did we hit the mark? Are we really opening up opportunities like, we feel like we are, we hope that we are, for introducing different housing types within some of our existing neighborhoods? We're going to have to get to the conversation about the people who live in these neighborhoods and whether or not they support an overlay being applied to their neighborhoods specifically, and that's something that we haven't gotten to yet. I've talked with a couple of you about even having you be a part of those conversations because I think that could help in building, some trust and just understanding as to what that looks like. And visually, I think that's important to be able to show what that looks like. So anyways, if you feel like, again, we're missing something or this really isn't creating a solution, those are things that we'd really like to know. So don't be shy if there's something that you feel like we've missed, or you just think this is kind of a lot of work for not a whole lot to be accomplished. It's important for us to even get that critical feedback. So kind of going over to the chat box here again. Nathan, I don't know how you want to have these conversations, but as far as parking requirements, that's something we've just started talking about. That seems to be an issue that comes up a lot. I'm not sure what the right balance is when, trying to devise an overlay where, again, you're introducing a totally different style of housing and density than what many of the neighborhoods are used to or comfortable with. So
I would say Josh, just in response to your question, I know when we adopted the zoning code in 2018, we offered up some parking substitutions like bike parking and credits for bike share and that kind of thing. But also we started to allow people to count parking for uses offsite and other things, but we restricted it to non-residential uses. So one of the first considerations we were making as we start talking about maybe a way in the overlay to help relieve some of those is to obviously open those substitutions up to the residential uses as well. But also thinking about, the demand for cars and for parking in these areas that we're talking about, and understanding that the code probably over requires in the areas. So I do believe we'll probably see some adjustment to that. And I think your ideas in here are good ones.
I'll give you an example. Trying to get a 12-plex onto a 50 by 140 lot. So you can get it on there. You can get the open space requirements on there for RM2, but you can only get 5 parking spaces. So you would be required to have 15 parking spaces because it's for 12 one-bedrooms. It's 1.25 per unit. So you would literally have to buy the lot next to you, tear whatever it is on it down just to put in parking. So you have more parking than building.
I know one of the considerations we talked about too was, even just a reduction to 1 space per unit for certain uses could be potentially relieving in that it helps mitigate that. I would say in your 12 unit example, there may still be issues even as proposed right now because of those lot area per unit restrictions. I mean, we've reduced them, and I think maybe what you can get on a 50-foot lot might be 6 units. If you look at those that we've set up in the chart, and I think we'll give you guys these as well so you can really look at it and analyze it with real world situations. But, the overlay may not even be that aggressive yet, but that's a really good, example to start with.
Yeah, but some kind of transit oriented density bonuses would be really excellent to look at.
Great. Yeah, thanks.
And
I don't know, Travis, did you respond? So Jessica, the hydrology issue, nothing we do in the zoning, I believe, will impact the IDP work and the requirements of the stormwater reviewers at the city, just because they're going to be operating out of different ordinances. It's definitely something good to know on our side that we could potentially talk about and start conversations around.
Yeah, no, I agree. And having worked, in the infrastructure development group, it doesn't escape me that is a concern that is often brought up in infill scenarios. And so we haven't talked a lot about that with the IDP group as far as hydrology concerns. We need to, but yeah, I was curious if it was something that came up during a rezoning application versus something that, you just come in for a permit on, because I think there's a little bit of discrepancy or discretion, I should say, given when we go through rezonings, maybe a little bit different than building permits. But again, that could be just having that conversation and communicating some of these changes with our friends in the permit center to make sure that we're all kind of speaking the same language. So it's an important conversation to have for sure.
I think it's the latter. This is Jessica. I think it's the latter.
Okay.
Travis, the Reader's Digest version was we had the zoning, didn't need a rezoning. We just wanted the lot split into fee simple lots for 2-unit townhomes. And we were asked to go the pre-development route. And when we did that, that's what introduced the comments around hydrology. And it stopped that project dead in the water.
Can you give me a sense of scale?
Yeah, it was 5 50-foot or yeah, 5 50-foot wide lots. So there would have been 10 units total.
Okay.
This is in Crutchfield.
Did they explain at all to you like what the trigger was? Was it units? Was it like just scale of development that required that? I mean, I'm just curious what it was that made them.
The only reason that was given to us was that there was downstream issues and that they were going to take that area seriously, any new development. But it makes me question, you know, if we had went for a building permit by right just for a single family home, whether or not it would have triggered those comments.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I knew what you just mentioned was what I was going to bring up, and that I know that there's context issues with stormwater as well, depending on where you're looking at and what the existing issues are. But I don't know. I agree that's a good question. If it was just a single family home, would that have ever come up?
Yeah.
I don't see any more hands raised at this point.
Yeah.
Oh, Weldon has a quick comment about open space in the chat, just to respond to that. That should have probably been put on our future considerations as well. It is something that we've mentioned that needs to probably be considered as we're talking about these sites and trying to accommodate things. So definitely noted.
Anything more you care to kind of say there, Weldon?
Yeah, with the multifamily infill, I mean, I agree with the reduction in parking. I think that would be something needed, but the open space goes hand in hand. It was something we overlooked on a project, and we had to go back to the Board of Adjustment on it. So I'd just say, just look at it. In the zoning code, it has a couple of options on offsetting some of that, but it's not very specific. We looked at permeable parking and some roof deck area or covered terraces type stuff, and it still wasn't specific enough in the zoning, so we weren't able to use those. And anyways, fortunately, we're able to get it approved through BOA, but it needs to be looked at as well.
That's a good point.
And piggybacking on what was said earlier, using on-street parking for residential, I think is probably something that needs to be looked at, because you're right, it is only for commercial use only. We've had that scenario where we're trying to provide one parking space per unit, but we have an abundance of, you know, some street parking, and we're not able to use it, so that didn't really benefit us there.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that either of those issues tend to happen in, you know, the same areas, or is it just infill scenarios generally?
I think a little bit of both, you know, definitely the infill, and what Josh alluded to, you know, if you have an infill of a small multifamily, you just can't get the parking to work, period. So, I mean, the project is hard to move forward because it's hard for our developer to buy an adjacent lot or do some parking off-site. I think a question I have, and I apologize, I don't know this off the top of my head, but if we do a fourplex unit infill, does that fourplex require a certain amount of parking? And I need to probably double check the zoning code, so I apologize for asking. Because I think that'll be some of the issues if we go in with some fourplexes where we do have some single family and you require 4 parking stalls, we'll run into some issues there.
At this time, they would still require the parking as stated in the code, but I do think multi-unit houses, which is what I think of, it depends, I guess, if you're doing 1 entry or 4 entries, and whether you're a multi-unit house or an apartment condo complex, and what parking applies. But both of those are uses that we're looking at adjustments to parking, at least within the overlay to begin. So.
Okay.
So now Josh, you mentioned earlier 12 units and you were talking about a 50-foot lot. Is that the desired density when we're looking at those sizes? I mean, because I think when we were talking internally about some of this, we were trying to understand, what is the feasibility? Is 6 units like you would see in maybe like a Swan Lake or some of those, 1920s era buildings? Is that something that's a feasible project to go in on a 50-foot lot and do, or is really 12 units where people are setting their sights and trying to get to? I mean,
I think it's the most that you can get on there.
Right.
Because then the more doors you have, then the more that you can make the project work. Because the financing structures favor larger projects over smaller ones. Also, to answer Weldon's question, I do have the parking portion pulled up, and multi-unit house is the exact same as apartments. So 1.25 for 0 and 1 bedroom and 2 for 2 bedroom. So in a 4-plex, you're probably going to have 2 to 3 bedrooms in that kind of a house structure. So for a 4-plex, you're going to need 8 spaces.
Understanding that obviously more units is better, but I guess the question is more, if it were restricted to 6, does that make it less? I mean, is someone going to not even consider it at that point is kind of, I think, the question we're trying to get answered, because that's where I think the overlay currently sits. If you're on about a 50-foot lot, you could get to about 6 units on one.
Yeah, I think that's about how many you could get without really trying. So
I think that's a developer question, but I haven't been asked to do a lot of 6-plexes. And so I don't know if that answers it from my end.
Right.
I haven't done many 6-plex or 4-plex infill in Tulsa. I mean, I've seen some of that in rural areas, but I haven't done one here in Tulsa yet. And we went after doing one a while back. I want to say maybe it was 8 units, and we weren't able to get it approved, and so that didn't go anywhere.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm just trying to, I think we even tried to understand what that neighborhood level apartment density is and what we could fit within those building footprints that we're talking about and what people would even take advantage of. So all that feedback is helpful.
unfortunately for Tulsa, much of what we're getting after was torn down in the 70s. And so, that stock doesn't exist anymore whenever it did previously. So that's where, we have a little bit of that in Cherry Street. And there's some of that in Gunboat. And then just north and west of downtown, but much of it was torn down, unfortunately.
So, Weldon, you said something that made me kind of intrigued to ask. So, is there kind of a sweet spot for what types of missing middle projects you're being asked to do? And I'm asking this broadly, not necessarily just to Weldon, but they were being asked to do because we've kind of identified, like I said, duplexes, multi-unit homes on up to apartments. And I think we've said like 10 to 12 units, but it sounds like that maybe, the interest in infill from the development community hasn't seen as much of those, 8, 10, 12, maybe even 6 unit. So I'd be curious if, yeah.
I'm surprised, to be honest with you, that we don't see more of it. Maybe it's what we're just talking about is if you have 6 units, you have to fit 1.2 parking spaces. And I know we're kind of getting hung up on that, but that might be a big root of the evil, is just if we can eliminate a lot of that parking requirement, otherwise you just can't physically fit it on that lot. So if we could eliminate the parking requirement and go back to the 1920s, I think we could. I think it would be desirable. Yeah, corner lot. Yeah, the multifamily job I'm doing right now is a 33 unit multifamily, and that was. It seemed like they were trying to get more, if possible, and I mean we condensed it down as much as possible. But I am surprised, and I'm curious to hear. Brad mentioned something about having a corner lot is possible, but I'm curious as to why we don't have more of the 6-unit infill projects than what we currently have.
Yeah,
I do think from a developer perspective, there's a lot of times what the equation that we're running is the construction typology and the cost of that compared to the income stream that it produces. So when you're looking at, say, 1 to 4 units, the economics of a, call it residential grade construction, would yield a return that's satisfactory. But as soon as you get to commercial grade construction, but you still have those same pretty modest rents that you charge in Tulsa, it tends to require more scale. So, well, then it doesn't surprise me, a 33 unit project probably does the trick, but if it were 15 or 20, it might not, and so I think that's a lot of what we find. Now, maybe there's ways to overcome that, and I definitely think the parking would help, but I do think it's part of it is just the rental market in Tulsa and what it supports compared to construction cost.
So Ross, you're talking about a distinction in the building codes that apply once you go above a certain amount of units? I mean, that's really good feedback. I think that's something that we need.
And the subcontractor base and just how you build it. I think there's a probably how you build it, and then also potentially the pace that you build it at. I think the commercial projects require quite a bit more, just a lot more planning than some of the residential ones do. And I think there's been times where we've probably renovated 5 or 6 small little 5-unit buildings in one neighborhood, and we had a vacant lot next door and kind of dreamt up and said, gosh, it'd be great to do this right next door, but we just couldn't figure out how to make it work. And it wasn't parking was not the only issue. So
sprinkling building, the firewalls, all that. That's a great point. Yeah.
Right.
The requirements
is that trigger from residential to commercial? Is it happening purely due to unit number?
Height, the number of units. There's some variables there. But building height, if you go 3-story, a different type of sprinkler system and a unit count. I don't know the code off the top of my head though.
Yeah, I can't believe that. Well, I'm disappointed.
Well, that's really great feedback. We're right at 4:30. I don't want to end this conversation just because I think there's a lot of good things to hear more about, but I think we can even follow up and have these conversations a little bit more, even one-on-one. Amy, will you pull up that last slide on the presentation? I think it gives kind of the next couple of roundtables that we're going to have. I just wanted to kind of end the note on that. We will send out the slide deck and a couple of things. So thank you, first and foremost. It's not lost on us that your time is valuable. So we appreciate you being here and kind of giving us some thoughts and ideas for what we need to be considering in developing the right tools for missing middle housing. So we have a couple of roundtables still to follow this that are going to be more about process and approval. Really kind of the same conversation. One will be with the Tulsa Planning Office. We'll start with 2 weeks from today, same time, October 19th, a Monday. And then in 2 weeks following that, we'll be having a similar conversation with Development Services and the Permit Center staff. So open invitation to either of those. We hope all of you will join us there. Hopefully, I think we've worked out the kinks for getting people out of the lobby so you can jump in.
I think that these calls are Zoom calls anyway. They're not Teams calls.
Oh.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. They're Zoom calls. So maybe that'll be better. The only thing that I was going to ask, so our hope really, again, we're going to be going to council for formal initiation on Wednesday. Your support's always good, but I think if you look at this slide deck and kind of see those numbers that we're proposing on lot size, lot area, addressing all of those concerns, knowing that we don't have parking and open space, we're kind of still thinking through those. It would be great if you could even apply some of these to hypothetical projects or even projects that you're working on now, or, you don't have to share the details of those projects with us, but even just testing out these regulations a little bit and telling us, this still wouldn't work for my project for, these reasons. That would be helpful for us, because right now we don't really have any specific projects in mind that we're working on. I think that we know just nationally some of the conversations around missing middle, that the lot patterns that we see in a lot of these neighborhoods, you can definitely make these homes fit physically, structurally, but financially, it's a little bit harder for us to know those answers, like what you brought up, Ross. So things like that and our neighborhood conversations will be important as well. So anyways, I'll leave you with that. And again, just thanks for being here, and we'll hopefully catch you in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Yep, thanks, everyone.